In the summer of 1942, a patrol of Britain's newly formed Special Air Service vanished without a trace in the North African desert. They were led by a young and audacious officer, Captain David Stirling, whose name would later become synonymous with the birth of the SAS. But in those early months of the North African campaign, the unit was little more than an experiment, born from failure and forged in secrecy. Their mission: to strike deep behind enemy lines and sabotage Axis airfields hundreds of miles from any friendly base. At that time, the war in the desert hung in the balance. Rommel's Afrika Korps had driven the British 8th Army east toward Egypt. Every mile lost tightened the noose around the Suez Canal. In this desperate setting, Stirling's plan seemed insane. His men, barely 30 of them, would drive jeeps through the vast Libyan sands, guided only by the stars, and attack German and Italian aircraft where they least expected it, on the ground in the dead of night. Their operation began from Kufra Oasis, a remote Allied outpost in southern Libya. The temperature soared above 120 degrees by day, plunging to freezing at night. Their vehicles, specially modified Chevrolet trucks and jeeps stripped of armor to reduce weight, were loaded with jerrycans of fuel, water, Vickers K machine guns, and explosives. Each man carried his life on his back: a Lee Enfield rifle, a revolver, a compass, and a few tins of bully beef. As dawn rose over the dunes, Stirling addressed his men. His voice, calm but firm, carried across the sand. "Gentlemen," he said, "we are the point of the spear. The success of this war depends not on how long we live, but on what we dare to do before we die." It wasn't bravado. It was conviction. This SAS had been born from the idea that small, audacious teams could do what entire divisions could not: disrupt, confuse, and bleed the enemy from within. The desert was their enemy as much as the Axis. Navigation depended on compass bearings and celestial fixes. One wrong course, and a patrol could vanish forever. The sand clogged engines, shredded tires, and devoured men who underestimated its vastness. Heat stroke and dehydration stalked them more relentlessly than enemy patrols. Yet, as the convoy rolled out of Kufra, morale was high. They believed in Stirling's vision, in the power of daring and surprise. A diary later found in the archives of the Imperial War Museum contained a line from one of the men, Corporal Harry MacDonald of the Scots Guards. "Out here," he wrote, "time feels different. We live by the hour. Tomorrow is a distant hope." Those words capture the fatalistic courage of men who ventured into the Libyan wilderness that June. They were not chasing glory. They were defying death itself. The plan was simple but perilous: strike 3 Luftwaffe airfields west of Tobruk, destroy as many aircraft as possible, and vanish back into the sands before dawn. They would rely on the Long-Range Desert Group, LRDG, for navigation support and recovery if things went wrong. Yet even the LRDG warned of the risks. The area was teeming with Italian patrols and Axis reconnaissance aircraft. Radio contact would be limited. Once they left Kufra, they were on their own. That night, as the engines coughed to life, Stirling watched the horizon fade into darkness. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Paddy Mayne, a former rugby player turned warrior, gave a tight grin. "Well, sir," he said, "if we make it back, the drinks are on me." Stirling replied softly, "If we make it back, Paddy, there'll be plenty to drink about." The convoy disappeared into the night. Hours turned to days. The desert offered no mercy, just endless dunes, burning days, and cold, silent nights. They encountered sudden sandstorms that turned daylight into chaos. Men covered their faces with scarves as the wind howled like artillery fire. When it passed, visibility was gone, and the patrol was scattered. Trucks were separated by miles of shifting sand. Some engines refused to start. Others veered off course, never to be seen again. Back at Kufra, radio silence grew longer. The base expected a transmission confirming their safe passage or strike timing, but none came. One operator noted in the signal log, "No word from Stirling." Hope fades by the hour. Days later, Allied reconnaissance flights searched for the missing patrol, but found nothing. No smoke, no movement, only the unbroken vastness of the Great Sand Sea. Rumors began to spread. Some said they had been ambushed by Italian armored cars. Others believed they had pressed on toward their target, low on fuel but determined to strike. The truth, then as now, remained elusive. Years later, a surviving member of another SAS unit recalled those early days with haunting clarity. "The desert doesn't kill with hate," he said. "It just waits." As the sun sank over the horizon, painting the dunes in crimson light. The fate of Sterling's patrol slipped beyond the reach of command. Their story, part courage, part tragedy, was just beginning to be written in the sands of North Africa. By the second night, the desert had turned against them. What began as a calculated mission now became a struggle for survival. The patrol, once a tight formation of jeeps cutting confidently across the Libyan sands, had fractured. The sandstorm, one of the worst that June, swept down from the Jebel Uvuin at range without warning. Visibility dropped to zero. Engines choked, compasses spun wildly, and in the confusion, the patrol vanished, each vehicle swallowed by the storm's fury. The long-range desert group later described those storms as walls of moving death. Dust so fine it seeped through sealed goggles and coated every lungful of air. For hours, the men could only cling to their jeeps, praying the wind wouldn't overturn them. When the storm finally passed, silence fell again, so total that one man wrote it was like standing in a cathedral built of sand. Captain Sterling's lead jeep had gone missing entirely. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Paddy Main, managed to rally a few stragglers, but the radio was dead. Without their leader, without navigation gear beyond a single service compass and a half-buried map, they were adrift in one of the most hostile terrains on Earth. Their objective, the Luftwaffe airfields west of Tobruk, was still hundreds of miles away. Fuel reserves had dropped dangerously low. Food was rationed to a single tin per man per day. Yet, despite the odds, they pressed on. As the sun blazed overhead, men began to hallucinate mirages, oases that weren't there, convoys shimmering in the distance that disappeared as they approached. Lance Corporal Peter Nichols recorded in his notebook, "It's not the heat that gets you. It's the silence. The mind starts to play tricks when you realize no one is coming to find you." Back in Cairo, the British command grew anxious. Sterling's patrol had not reported in. No distress signal. No confirmation of contact with the LRDG. The operation was classified as unacknowledged, a term meaning neither confirmed alive nor lost. Officially, the men did not exist. Meanwhile, Sterling's half a patrol, cut off and navigating blind, attempted to re-establish bearings by night. They used the stars, Polaris, Orion's belt, and the Southern Cross to guide their route north. But fatigue set in. Several men were suffering from dehydration and heat exhaustion. Their water rations had turned warm and metallic. One man collapsed, his canteen empty. They buried him at dawn under a mound of sand, marking his grave with a single rifle, but to keep morale alive, Sterling reminded his men of why they were there. "We are not tourists in hell," he said. "We are the architects of it, and will make the enemy feel every mile of it." It was more than defiance, it was survival through purpose. By the third night, they sighted distant lights, flickering dots that could only be from an enemy convoy or a forward base. The temptation to investigate was overwhelming. But without confirmation, approaching could mean certain death. They decided to split again, 2 jeeps scouting ahead, the rest conserving what fuel they had left. Those 2 jeeps never returned. Main's group, reduced to 6 men, struggled to keep their engines running. Sand had infiltrated carburetors and fuel lines. Each breakdown meant hours of manual labor under the scorching sun. When one of the Chevrolets finally gave out, they siphoned its remaining petrol and left it behind, burning the vehicle to prevent enemy detection. In the distance, the Great Sand Sea stretched infinitely. The maps they carried, RAF issue charts, were outdated and vague, showing blank areas labeled simply as unexplored. These were not exaggerations. Large parts of the Libyan desert were still unmapped in 1942. By June 15th, Sterling's men had been out of contact for nearly a week. The LRDG launched a limited search, but it was like looking for a whisper in a hurricane. One of their officers, Major Guy Prendergast, later wrote, "The desert doesn't give up its secrets easily. Out there, you can lose an entire patrol and never find a tire track again." The emotional toll was immense. The men knew that if fuel or water ran out, there would be no rescue. Yet they pressed forward, guided by Sterling's stubborn belief that movement, any movement, was better than waiting to die. Modern readers might see recklessness. But in 1942, with Rommel's forces tightening their grip and morale fragile, this was the mindset that separated the living from lost. The SAS were pioneers of a new kind of warfare, one where survival itself was an act of defiance. As the chapter closes, Sterling's last recorded radio transmission crackled faintly across the static. low on fuel. Proceeding to target. Then nothing. No response, no coordinates, no follow-up. The desert took back its silence. The message, low on fuel. Proceeding to target, was the last anyone ever heard from Captain David Stirling's patrol. It was transmitted in the early hours of June 17, 1942, from somewhere west of Kufra. The signal was weak, barely readable, but clear enough to send a chill through Allied command. They had no coordinates, no confirmation of success or failure, only that Stirling's men were still moving deeper into Axis territory, even as their resources ran dry. That morning, the long-range desert group attempted to establish contact. Repeated calls went unanswered. For several days, Allied intelligence picked up no transmissions, not even from the Luftwaffe units the SAS were supposed to strike. The desert, once alive with plans and purpose, had fallen completely silent. The official operation logs marked the patrol as missing, presumed captured. Yet, for weeks after, rumors spread across the North African front. Pilots flying reconnaissance over the Libyan interior reported distant columns of smoke. Others claimed to see flashes of gunfire near the Tobruk-Derna corridor, too far south for regular Axis operations. Something had happened out there, but no one knew exactly what. German records would later confirm that, around June 18th, a series of explosions tore through two airfields near Tamimi and Burqa. Fuel dumps, vehicles, and several aircraft were destroyed in nighttime blasts that bore the unmistakable signature of SAS sabotage. One Luftwaffe mechanic, interviewed after the war, recalled hearing a distant roar, like engines in the dark, followed by chaos. "We thought it was a bombing raid," he said, "but no planes came. Only fire." If true, it meant Stirling's men had reached their targets. But if they did, why did no one return? In Cairo, British command debated their fate. Some believed the patrol was ambushed during withdrawal, cut off by Italian reconnaissance units. Others suspected capture, perhaps even execution, though no Axis reports ever mentioned taking SAS prisoners from that operation. The absence of evidence was more haunting than any confirmation. A recovered field diary from another SAS unit contained a single reference. Stirling's desert men, still no word. Some say the desert keeps what it takes. That sentence, brief and understated, spoke volumes. The war had no room for the missing, only for the next mission. Meanwhile, intelligence officers sifted through intercepted German radio traffic. One encrypted message referenced a British raiding party destroyed near the southern dunes. But when decoded, its coordinates pointed to an empty stretch of desert hundreds of miles from where the patrol should have been. Had they become lost, or were they operating beyond their brief, pursuing targets deeper inland? The mystery deepened when a captured Italian officer later told interrogators about ghost vehicles seen traveling by moonlight near Mechelai, far from any known Allied route. "We thought they were mirages," he said. They disappeared into the sand the next day. Whether fact or rumor, it added to the legend forming around Stirling's missing patrol. One SAS veteran, interviewed decades later, reflected, "When you go that deep, there's a point of no return, not just physically, but mentally. You stop thinking about getting back. You think about finishing what you started." That mentality, equal parts courage and fatalism, defined the early SAS ethos. It was not about survival. It was about impact. Modern historians reviewing the surviving mission notes agree on one thing. The operations planning was meticulous, but its risks were astronomical. The patrol was tasked to travel more than 800 kilometers through uncharted desert, with limited navigation tools and no reliable extraction plan. It was an act of daring bordering on suicidal, but in 1942, desperate times demanded desperate innovation. And yet, the evidence, those burned airfields, those German reports of unknown saboteurs, suggest they succeeded before vanishing. The last confirmed sighting came from an RAF pilot who, during a supply drop near Jebel Akhdar, spotted what he described as blackened vehicles half buried in the dunes. But when ground patrols reached the area weeks later, there was nothing. No wrecks, no tracks, no bodies. Just sand, endless and shifting, as though the desert itself had erased them. Even today, historians argue whether Stirling's men perished from exposure, ran out of fuel, or were intercepted by Axis patrols. The truth remains uncertain. What's known is that no survivors ever returned, and no bodies were ever officially identified. As the British archives later summarized in a single line, Operation deemed incomplete. Outcome unknown. And perhaps that's what made the story endure, not in its clarity, but in its mystery. A team of men who stepped beyond the edge of survival, accomplished the impossible, and then disappeared without trace. It would take more than 3 years, and the end of the war, before the desert began to give up its secrets. In 1948, an expedition of the Long-Range Desert Group, now restructured as part of a post-war mapping team, stumbled upon what appeared to be the remnants of an old military encampment near the edge of the Kalanchio Sand Sea. Scattered across a shallow depression were rusted petrol tins, fragments of uniforms, and the twisted frame of a jeep. On its side panel, still faintly visible beneath the rust, were the faded letters S. The discovery reignited an old mystery that had haunted veterans of the North African campaign, the disappearance of Sterling's 1942 patrol. For years, the incident had lived in whispers and speculation, tucked away in dusty files labeled classified, incomplete. Now, under the relentless Libyan sun, a few fragile clues began to surface. Among the debris lay a small, sand-encrusted notebook, its cover cracked, its pages warped by time. Inside, faded pencil entries told a harrowing story. The diary belonged to Corporal Harry MacDonald, one of Sterling's original men. The final entry, dated June 18, 1942, read simply, "We move at dawn. Spirits high. God willing, we'll make the target before the engines give out." After that, nothing. No further words, no indication of what happened next. The LRDG team, led by Major Bill Kennedy Shaw, meticulously recorded the site. They found evidence of at least 3 burned-out vehicles, all deliberately destroyed, likely to prevent capture. Nearby, a shallow trench contained what they believed were makeshift graves. Out of respect, the remains were reburied, and coordinates were sent to the British War Graves Commission. When news of the find reached London, it stirred old memories among surviving SAS veterans. Many had assumed the missing men were long dead, perhaps executed by Italian forces or lost to the elements. But the discovery hinted at something more complex. Perhaps they had survived longer than anyone thought, continuing their mission until the very end. Archival cross-references reveal that on the same night MacDonald's diary ended, Axis radio intercepts reported multiple ground explosions near Bars Airfield, consistent with sabotage operations. It was possible, then, that the patrol had reached their objective, carried out the attack, and perished on the way back. If true, it meant their mission had succeeded, but at the ultimate price. A veteran named Tom Phipps, who had served in the same region months later, visited the site in 1949. He wrote in his memoirs, "The sand had swallowed almost everything, but you could still feel their presence. A single boot print turned to stone, a scrap of webbing caught in a bush, proof that they'd been there and that they'd fought to the end." The story took on a spiritual quality among the old SAS ranks. To them, these men had become symbols of what Sterling had once called the thin line between daring and death. The unit's motto, "Who dares wins," wasn't just a slogan. It was a creed forged by men like MacDonald, Maine, and Sterling's Lost Patrol. But mystery still lingered. Why had no attempt been made to recover them sooner? Declassified records in the 1950s revealed that the British command had quietly listed the patrol as expended personnel, a cold bureaucratic term for soldiers sent on operations with no expected return. It was wartime pragmatism, but for those who had served with them, it felt like betrayal. As historians began to piece together the fragments, one fact became clear. The patrol had continued beyond all reasonable limits. They had run out of fuel, lost radio contact, and yet kept pushing toward their target. Their vehicles' burn shells were found nearly 300 miles from where they should have turned back. This was no navigational error, it was resolve carried to its breaking point. Modern experts studying the recovered artifacts concluded that the men had likely been stranded after their final raid, unable to find their way back to the rendezvous with LRDG. The desert, indifferent and vast, became their final battlefield. Standing at the recovered site, one war correspondent wrote, "The wind moves across their graves like the tide. You could walk past and never know that heroes lay beneath your feet. Even decades later, the sand still shifts, covering and uncovering relics of their final stand." For archaeologists and military historians, each fragment adds another line to the unfinished story of the SAS' first great mystery. Yet, despite the discoveries, no one ever found Sterling's own jeep or his personal effects. Some say it lies buried beneath the dunes still, sealed by time and heat. Others believe the wrecks were looted or carried away by nomads long ago. The truth, like the desert itself, remains elusive. Next, we follow the modern investigations that unearthed Luftwaffe records, RAF reports, and testimonies suggesting the impossible, that the Lost Patrol might have actually completed their mission before vanishing, leaving behind not just destruction, but a legacy that redefined modern special operations. Decades after the guns fell silent, historians began to revisit the enigma of the lost SAS patrol of 1942. What they uncovered reshaped how the story was told, and how the regiment itself remembered its origins. In 1983, a British military historian named Major John Tonkin, himself a former SAS officer, was combing through declassified Luftwaffe records at the Bundesarchiv in Freiburg, West Germany. There, buried among airfield maintenance reports, he found a curious entry dated June 18, 1942. Nighttime explosions at Barsan Tmimi. 5 aircraft destroyed. Cause: suspected sabotage by enemy raiders. No air activity reported. Tonkin was stunned. The date and location matched the last known phase of Sterling's mission. After cross-referencing with Allied operational logs, he realized what this meant. The missing patrol had, against all odds, likely succeeded in carrying out their attack. They had completed their mission before disappearing forever into the desert. The revelation sparked renewed investigation. British and Libyan teams returned to the suspected raid sites, uncovering fragments of British-manufactured explosives consistent with those used by early SAS units. One rusted Vickers K gun, its serial number still legible, was traced back to the very batch issued to Sterling's men in early June 1942. The evidence, long buried by wind and war, began to align. Yet the mystery remained only half solved. No definitive proof explained what happened afterward, how or where the men perished. Theories abounded. Some experts suggested they had run out of fuel after the raid and attempted to navigate back on foot, only to succumb to exposure. Others believed they might have been intercepted by Italian patrols, their bodies never recorded or recovered. There were even accounts from Bedouin tribes in the region who spoke of ghost soldiers passing through their camps, dehydrated and delirious, offering watches and rifles for water before vanishing again into the sands. These accounts, while impossible to verify, gave a haunting human dimension to what was once a sterile military report. In an interview years later, SAS veteran Johnny Cooper reflected on the mystery. What they did out there was madness by most standards, but that's how legends are born. They didn't die running. They died moving forward. That spirit became the bedrock of the regiment's identity. The motto "Who dares wins" wasn't coined as bravado. It was an epitaph for men like Sterling's Lost Patrol. Their courage, their endurance, and their refusal to surrender became part of SAS lore, shaping the ethos of every mission that followed, from the jungles of Malaya to the mountains of Afghanistan. In recent years, satellite imaging and desert archaeology have reignited interest in their fate. In 2011, a joint Anglo-Libyan team discovered metallic anomalies deep within the Great Sand Sea, possible remnants of vehicles. A brief expedition unearthed what might have been the hub of a 1940s-era Jeep wheel. Testing revealed British manufacturing marks, but shifting sands and political instability halted further excavation. The desert, it seems, was still not ready to surrender its secret. For modern viewers, the mystery carries a profound message. These were men who operated with minimal resources, under near-impossible odds, guided by nothing but courage, trust, and a sense of duty that transcended survival. They remind us that the most enduring victories are not always measured in return journeys, but in impact. As military historian Peter Caddick Adams wrote, they lived a brief, bright flame of defiance. Their disappearance was not failure, it was completion. Even the German records, clinical and impersonal, acknowledged the effect. After the Bars raid, Luftwaffe Command issued new security protocols for airfield defense, a direct response to the mysterious sabotage. In a way, Sterling's vanished men reshaped enemy tactics without ever being found. And yet, the final question remains unanswered. Where did they go? No crash sites, no grave markers, no final transmission beyond that single line, proceeding to target. It is as though the desert itself closed around them, sealing their story as part of its eternal silence. As the sands shift each year, exposing and reburying fragments of the past, archaeologists continue to search. But perhaps the greatest revelation lies not in what they find, but in what these men represent, an unflinching commitment to purpose in the face of uncertainty. Today, the names of the men from the 1942 SAS Desert Patrol are carved into marble at the SAS Memorial in Hereford, England. Their story, long obscured by sand and time, has become legend, a parable of courage, impermanence, and the price of daring. Visitors who stand before those names often don't realize how little is known of their final hours. No confirmed burial sites, no last photographs, just fragments, a burned-out Jeep, a diary half-filled, a single radio message. Yet their absence tells its own story, one that speaks as loudly as any victory parade. Captain David Sterling survived the war, captured months later during another deep desert operation. He would go on to receive the DSO and become a symbol of audacious leadership. But even he never fully accepted the fate of that missing patrol. In later interviews, his voice would soften when asked about them. They knew the risks, he said, but they believed in something greater than themselves. That's what the desert taught us. You don't conquer it. You surrender to it and hope it spares you long enough to do your duty. For the surviving SAS veterans, the story of the Lost Patrol became both wound and inspiration. It reminded them of the fragility of every mission, of every heartbeat in war. It was said that whenever a new recruit joined a regiment, someone would tell the tale, not as a warning, but as a measure of spirit. The men of 1942 had proven the meaning of the motto, "Who dares wins," even when winning meant vanishing without return. Over the years, writers, soldiers, and historians have tried to piece together the moral beneath the mystery. Some see tragedy, men sent too far, too soon for too little. Others see transcendence, soldiers who faced mortality with open eyes and steady hands. Both may be true. As one veteran later reflected, they lived as if they'd already made peace with dying. That's why they could do what others couldn't. That sentiment echoes the deeper human truth of their story, the same message the desert seemed to whisper. We are all temporary. Time buries everything, men, machines, memories. Yet, in the moments we dare, when we act with conviction, we etch our mark, however briefly, on history's shifting sands. In 2012, during a quiet commemoration at Hereford, a SAS chaplain closed the service with a line that seemed to capture the spirit of both the regiment and the Lost Patrol. They are not missing. They are simply waiting beyond the dunes. For those who understand the desert, that feels right. Nothing is ever truly lost there, only hidden until the wind decides to remember. Today, their story lives not just in military textbooks, but in the hearts of those who seek meaning and courage. The mystery of their disappearance remains unsolved, and perhaps it should, because in that silence lies the power of their legacy, a reminder that life's measure isn't how long it lasts, but how deeply it's lived. And so, the SAS Desert Patrol that never returned stands as more than a wartime tale. It is a meditation on impermanence, purpose, and the stoic truth that to live before you die means to act boldly, even when tomorrow is uncertain. As the sun sets over the Libyan dunes, casting long shadows over the land they once crossed, it's said that the desert grows quiet again. Only the wind moves, softly, endlessly, carrying with it the faint echo of engines that vanished more than 80 years ago. Men who dared. Men who disappeared. Men who, in their silence, still speak.